Okay guys, first things first here, we're going to want to take our air cleaner off. It's an 8mm bolt. We're going to work on, what I'm going to start with is I'm going to work on getting the turbo off and the manifold off first and get these coolant lines out of the way. Kind of start on this side of the engine and work our way over. So a couple things here on the turbo. We obviously got our feed line, and then we have our drain line down here that we have to take off. And then we have our V-bands here and here. I believe those are 11mm. So we're going to take those off, take it off here, and then we have, I believe they're 13mm bolts that actually hold it to the manifold. And then we're going to unplug our wastegate, unplug that, and go from there. Okay guys, first things first here, we're going to start on this side of the engine. We're going to get this turbo pulled off. In here we got 11mm on these V-bands. Typically almost every V-band is on 11mm, just for future notice. So we got the 11mm down here and an 11mm over here on the exhaust. We'll start by getting those off. Now that we got those off, like I said, what I typically do is I like to take the clamps all the way off, the nuts all the way off the clamp. Makes it a lot easier to get them to come to separate. So we got our exhaust separated there. We got our compressor side here. This is also O-ringed, so we're gonna need to get a new O-ring for that. And then I also unplugged the wastegate off of the bottom. It's just a little vacuum hose, pulls right off. All right, so now we're gonna break this 5/8 nut loose here on this old feed line. Get that off there. Swing that out of the way. There is a little sealer washer in there that we're going to want to make sure we replace. Just swing that out of the way. Okay, so now we can move on. We got everything off of the turbo. Now what we're going to do is come in here and we're going to get these bolts off. There's 4 bolts that hold it to the manifold, and we're going to take them loose. I think the best way to go on these top ones is going to be a boxed-in wrench. Get in there and get to that. So a little trick on these guys. This is actually a 15mm on these bolts that go into the manifold. Little trick here: you can hook your wrenches together like this, and it kind of gives you some more leverage. So you can hook your wrench together like that, and then you can bring it in here, hook it on there, down in here with your boxed end, and you can use the leverage of it to break it loose. So little trick there on them ones, guys, to help you out with those. So we're going to get those 4 bolts off, and then we'll be able to pull the whole turbo off. So turbo's off. We make sure you guys don't forget we got 2 10mm bolts on that oil drain there. So take them off. And then that, I had to use kind of a little pry bar to get the gasket was kind of brittle there. So and make sure, like on anything, on oil ports, man, plug them for sure. Just to keep junk out of there. You got a rag here in the intake to keep junk from getting in there. So now we're gonna work on getting these coolant hoses off. We got some hose clamps up here by the thermostat housing, and then we have some hose clamps down here as well, and then just 2 here. And then we can just pull these the bolts off of this bracket right here that holds it to the manifold, and then we can just pull those coolant hoses right off. So a little trick here on these heater hoses, guys, is to get them off. Once you get the clamps off, take a pair of channel locks and grab the hose. You don't want to squeeze super hard, but get on the hose good enough and just rock the hose back and forth with the channel locks to get it to break loose. Now on these ones down here, you can't quite get a pair of channel locks to really on there real good. So I just used a long pick with a 90°, and you can kind of run it around the hose. Get it in there and run it around it a few times. Get it to break loose, and then you can twist the hose and get the hose to come off just like that. So just get something in there to work it out good, and it'll be a lot easier. So like I said, channel locks work really good. A pick, if you can get it down in there, just make sure you don't poke through the hose, obviously. But they just get kind of gummed up after being in there for a while and getting hot. So we got that all off. There is a 10mm mounting bolt right here we got to get off. We got it off up here, so heater hoses are done. Kind of push them out of the way. So now we got the coolant lines out of our way. We got our EGT probe out. It's just a little 13 millimeter, I think 12 millimeter. We got that out of there. So what I'm gonna do now is I started to try to break these boats loose, and they didn't really look like they wanted to come very nice. I got a couple of them broke loose, but it was a little bit sketchy. So I want to put some heat on them. So what I'm gonna do instead is I'm gonna get because I have to send this head out to the machine shop, so I wanted to get the injectors taken out of it. So I'm gonna take these injection lines off. And the way we do that is we come over here. We're gonna have to pull our intake off. So we got some 10 millimeters on this intake. We're gonna pull that off. We got our 11 millimeter here on our boot. Pull those off, and then we are gonna take and remove, unhook the battery. We're gonna remove our grid heater, pull that off, and then we are going to take and break all these lines loose. They're 19 millimeter on all the lines, and then immediately we're going to cap all these lines on the pump. We're going to put caps on all those just to keep the dirt and crap from getting in there. Now we got the intake off. You can see what we're working with here. I got the two 10 millimeter bolts off for the grid heater, and then we have two 8 millimeter bolts for these little brackets right here that hold the lines to the cylinder head, and then we have two more 8 millimeter bolts back here. And once we get all those off, we can go through and crack all of our lines loose and take the whole line setup off as one. Once we get them all loose on the injectors and all loose over here, we can pull the whole thing off as one piece. Got all of our injection lines off, got everything capped. Now what we're gonna end up, now what we need to do is go through and take all of our fuel return bolts out of the injectors so that we can get the injectors out. So they're 10 millimeter there. There is a 10 millimeter bolt back here that holds that down, and it comes over here to this on the fuel bowl. And we're gonna have to take this bolt out right here, and then we can pull the fuel return lines off. So with the return lines off, we can now move on to getting the hold down nuts for the injectors off. It's a 21 millimeter, and as you can see on this one, I already got it out. You can see the nuts there. First of all, let's back up here. I want to say start by capping all the injectors and then going through and cleaning off the area where they're at. This had a bunch of dirt and crap all over it, so I went through and cleaned all that off and blew it off with shop air. You can see how nice and clean all those areas are, to minimize the amount of junk that we get down in the cylinder. And then basically you'll take the nut off, looks like this, and then I have a special puller that I'll put on here and pull them out. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to spray some lubricant down in there and let it kind of soak. Might even let it soak overnight to try to help aid in getting them out, because they are kind of a bit of a bear. So we'll get all these nuts pulled off of here, and like I said, big thing I can't stress enough here, guys, is try to stay as clean as possible on this stuff and minimize any contamination in the injectors, because one little piece of junk can mess these things up. So big thing is just try to stay as clean as possible. I know it's challenging on old dirty trucks like this, but staying clean is the biggest thing here. So let's get all these nuts off and go from there. For those of you guys that might interest you, this is the kit in the Snap-on catalog, and these are the sets I have right here. There's the part number, it's CUMDS 12 valve, and then there's a CUMDS 24 valve for the common rail stuff. This is the kit here. Comes with a nice bag. It's a really nice kit. Comes with a compression gauge or compression tester and everything. This is actually what the stuff looks like. This is the barring tool right here, for instance. 12 valve compression gauge adapter, common rail and compression adapter, fuel rail caps to cap off the fuel rail for the common rails. We got feeler gauges, pump gear puller, This is actually you screw this onto the injector, and then the other end actually screws into this slide hammer to pull the injectors. Really nice tool, makes it really nice and easy. Like I said, that tool to clean the holes out. Same thing for the common rails. Compression gauge for them that goes up to 800. Some crow's feet for the lines for, this is a 19 millimeter crow's foot for like a common rail fuel lines, get them off. Really nice stuff. It's a really good kit. It's kind of expensive, but it's nice to have. So something to think about if you guys are starting to do a lot of the diesel stuff. Really nice to have, and they work really good. So alright guys, so now it's time here. We're getting ready. We're going to pull these injectors now. Something you're going to want to do is, first off, you're going to want to pull the hold down bolt nut off like we did earlier. I think it's 21 millimeter. Pull those off, and then what I did was I sprayed penetrating oil down in each one of these and let it sit all day while I was working on customer stuff. And now I'm coming back here at 5. I've soaked them probably 3 times now. And what you're gonna do is, this is a special tool that really helps you out. It's part number CJ142, snap-on job here. And basically it screws on to the top of the injector where the nut usually goes for the injection line. And you screw this thing, set this thing on here, screw it in like this, and this is basically just like a little slide hammer. So it sits here like this, and then you just like that. I already popped this one loose. It usually takes a lot more force than that, but then it pulls them out just like that. So we're gonna go through and do all 6 like that to get them out of there. And then, like I said, make sure you're really clean with them and you put them on a nice clean rag on the bench somewhere out of sight, out of mind, and keep them capped once you get them taken off. Alright guys, so on this back one here, you can still get the slide hammer on number 5, but on number 6 you can't get the slide hammer on there. So I'm going to show you guys how I did it on number 5 here. It's a little bit easier to see. So I screwed my adapter onto the injector, and then I took a pry bar and went right in here like this, got underneath the lip of it. You can see how there's a lip on this so you can grab. So you put your pry bar right underneath that lip, and you just easily pry up, pulls it right out. So that's how you get number 6 out. Like I said, just screw that down on there, catch that lip with a pry bar, put the pry bar on the manifold, and just pop it loose. So now all the injectors are out, I would suggest going through and just plugging all the holes, just so you don't get any junk down in there. And actually, I kind of decided what I'm going to do instead, guys, is on this manifold, I'm going to pull the head with the manifold, just so I can apply some heat better on the bottom ones. So once I get the head off, I can take it over to the bench and put some good heat on it to get to these bottom bolts. So we'll actually pull the head with the manifold on it. I'm going to use the engine hoist to pull it because I'm by myself. So we'll be able to get some better heat on there from the bottom side with it off. So now what we're going to move on to doing is starting to pull some of this wiring harness off. There's a bolt here up front. There's a bolt here for the grounds, and then there's a bolt right here for this mount. Then we're going to unplug this boost sensor here and a couple more things back here we're going to undo. Start pulling some of this stuff off of the cylinder head. We got our sensor here for our boost line for our boost gauge, and a couple of other things down here on the side. So we're going to move on and start getting some of this stuff off of here. I'm leaving the valve covers on to the bitter end just because, for the simple fact that I don't want to get any junk down in there if I can help it. So leaving them on until with the bitter end. We'll take them out and I'll show you guys how to get the rockers and the push rods and everything out. So first things first, so let's get all this stuff off of the cylinder head. So start by taking these couple bolts off up here and moving this wiring harness out of the way. Okay guys, so we got two 15 millimeter bolts up here for these little grommets. Got them out. This is just a little clip, just goes down on here. You can just pull that up. Then we also have a 10mm bolt down here for this that we have to undo as well. So we got everything off the front of the cylinder head. I also took the upper radiator hose off just to get it out of my way. I got my boost sensor off for my gauge. I got my other boost, for the AFC housing. Got that off, and I got the boost sensor, the sensor in the intake here off as well. Got all that laid over. We're going to take off those two 10mm bolts for the fuel filter housing. Get that off, and then we're also going to take and put our serpentine belt tool down in here and take the belt off. And then the only thing we're going to do for this alternator is we're just going to take the bracket itself off to basically relieve it from the cylinder head. We're going to leave the thermostat housing on it so we can keep this hook, so we can put the hook on our engine hoist to pick it up off of there. So we're going to get this bracket pulled off, get that mount pulled off on the back there, and keep moving forward. Okay, so we got our alternator bracket off, and then I just looped this wiring harness underneath of the thermostat housing so it's out of the way. And back here, guys, we got like I said, our two 10mm bolts right here and here, and then we can slide our fuel filter housing out of the way. But then you also have to take, there's two 15mm bolts on this hook back here on the back of the head. And you got to take this 15mm bolt out on the driver's side to get this little bracket off for the fuel lines, and then put that bolt back in so we can have a lifting device to lift this off of here. So two 10s and a 15 up there. So now that we got all that stuff off, guys, we're ready to start pulling these valve covers and pulling push rods and rocker arms and such. Something you guys are going to need is this tool right here, part number YA9565A. This is a Blue Point. It's a barring tool. On these Cummins, they don't have a one single crank bolt on the front to be able to turn it over. So you do, unless you have the adapter kit, I think Fleece sells it, that makes it into to where you can put a 1/2-inch drive on it. You got to use one of these barring tools. And what you're going to do is right down here on the passenger side, you're going to pull this plug out right down there, right here. And then you're going to install this in there, and you can turn the engine over with this barring tool. And we're going to put cylinder 1 up on top dead center of compression, just so it's there and ready to go for when we go to put it back on. And the way you're gonna find compression is you're gonna put it up on top dead center, and then both valves, both rocker arms should be loose, i.e. both valves are closed. So turn it over, get it up to top dead center, and make sure both valves are loose, both rocker arms are loose, and then you know you're on compression. Alright guys, so there's the barring tool in there. I just got a little 3/8 ratchet on there. Something for those of you guys that don't have a barring tool, you can use the alternator to turn the engine over. Just something for those guys that don't have it. You can use the alternator with the serpentine belted on it, obviously, to turn the engine over as well. But you can see here that both intake and exhaust valves are loose on cylinder 1. Like I said, you don't have to do that. It's just something I like to do. But we got these loose. Now we're going to take and unbolt our rocker arms. Big thing here, guys, is keep all this stuff organized. When you pull your push rods out, keep them organized, because the rocker arms and the push rods and the tappets, they all wear kind of together with each individual one. So you want to keep all that stuff together. You don't want to be swapping push rods from here to there. Keep it all together and keep it organized. Label things, do whatever you have to do to remember, just to stay organized. Biggest thing here, guys. So we'll get these off, we'll do that on all of them, and then I'll show you how to take the cowl apart so you can get the push rods out of the back. Alright guys, the first step to removing these this cowl is we got to get the wipers off, and I'll show you how you do it here. If you're looking at the wiper on the truck, it sits like this. There's a little tab right here, and you have to pull out on that tab. And what that does is, if you look in here, you can see this little catch right here, and when you push it all the way in, it hooks in underneath of the wiper transmission there. So what you do is when you pull that out like that, it allows it to come off. So there's a little tab right here on the side that you got to pull off, and then all it is pretty simple. There's just Usually there's a rubber piece that goes right here, but this one's gone. So you have to pull that rubber piece off. And there's some little Torx fasteners here. We'll pull them off, and then we'll have to undo our windshield wiper or windshield washer hoses right here, and we'll be able to pull the whole cowl off. Alright guys, so you can see here with the cowl off, there are some rubber plugs. One sits right here, and there's another one. Try to shine a light in there. Right back there. Pull both them plugs out, and you can take and see, got my push rod here. You can grab the push rod and put it up through there, like so, to get them to come out. Just like that. And there you go. So pretty easy to get that off, no biggie. We'll keep moving forward here. Okay, so with all the rocker arms and push rods out, we are finally ready to start pulling some head bolts here. And there is a sequence to pulling the head bolts. Don't just start whizzing these things out, because you will warp the head. There's like I said, there's a sequence. I'll put it in the end so you guys can see it. As far as taking them out, basically you kind of start in the middle and just keep working your way around in a pattern like this, spiraling out to evenly loosen up the head. So we'll get, I suggest doing all this stuff by hand, at least break them loose by hand, because like I said, these have been in here for a while. These are factory head bolts, so don't want to break them off. So make sure we loosen them up nicely, and then you can run them out with the impact after you get them broke loose. So we got it off here, guys. Just gonna go through and kind of show you how I did it. I just took a chain and went from, like I said, we left those mounts here and back here. I took a chain and went from both of those and bolted it together. Now what you're gonna want to do is, instead of using I'm using an engine hoist, which I would highly suggest, but instead of using the hook, because it'll slide, I bolted the chain right to the hoist so it couldn't slide on the chain. And then what I used was, I used a ratchet strap, because you'll see you don't have enough clearance to get it out unless you tilt it. So I'm by myself, so I don't have another guy here to help me, so I used a ratchet strap to kind of pick the front of it up, and now it'll come right out. Now the way I did that was, I put a 5/16 bolt in right here through the head, and it allowed me to hook a strap on this side of it, and then I just wrapped it around, and I threw a head bolt down from up here. I threw a head bolt down in here to kind of hold the strap, and then it actually worked pretty good. So this is the way I usually do them, and then you can just take it right out, no problem. So we got everything laid out here on the table. We got all of our parts nice and clean. Everything looked good. We got the insides of the valve covers all cleaned up. Everything looks good there. Everything's nice and clean. We got our new cylinder, well, our reman cylinder head, if you will, back from the machine shop. New valve seals. The valves have been lapped, and we also got the bottom of the cylinder head decked. Everything is good to go. I got everything organized in the way that it came out of the truck. Like I said, it's always a good thing to be over organized if you can, you know, like I said, because it really helps when it goes back together. Everything goes back in the same spot that it was, you know, so everything's happy there. We got our injectors laid out here. What we're gonna do now, the next step, is to try to address cleaning up this cylinder head. And this is the way I do it. I'm not saying, I mean, obviously the best way to do it would be get it professionally machined or something like that, but obviously nobody's gonna pull an engine out just to machine it when they're doing a head gasket. So what I do is I use a soft bristled. Notice I said soft bristled. Don't use a really hard one. You just want something to take the gunk off of it and clean it up. You don't want anything that's gonna tear in, you know, groove up the surface. You want this surface to basically stay as flat as you can get it. You just want to take all the gunk off of it. So I'm going to use this soft bristled wire wheel. We're going to clean this up. We're going to clean up the ringland here, clean up that ridge there, try to get some of that cleaned up. This thing's been sitting for a while, so it's got a little bit of surface rust there. I'm not too concerned about that. We'll probably run a hone down it and just clean it up a little bit. We'll get all this stuff cleaned up, and we'll get ready to set the head on this thing. So this is what it looks like after we get it all cleaned up. Looks pretty good. We, like I said, I used the wire wheel to get the majority of the stuff off. And then I came back with this. This is a really, really fine pad. It's like an abrasive pad, but it's an ultra fine one, so it doesn't really scratch it at all. It just kind of levels it out, and I put it on this piece of wood. And you just kind of go back and forth like this. You use a piece of wood to keep it flat so you don't round anything off. You just kind of go over everything, get it nice and flat. You can run it up and down like this. Got it all nice and clean. And now what we're going to want to do is clean all of our holes out where our head bolts are going. You can see here in this hole right here. Well, let me get my other flashlight. See all that oil down in there. We got to get all that oil out of there. So we're going to go around and clean out every single hole where the head bolts go into and make sure there's no oil in there, because what happens is you cannot compress a liquid. So if you go to try to put a head bolt in there and it's still got oil in it, you could run the risk of actually cracking the block. So we need to go through and make sure on each one that we clean out every single head bolt hole, blow it out with a blowgun just like this, come in here and just clean all the junk out of it. Yeah, we're getting some oil out of them. And go through and just do that on every single one. Even shoot a little brake clean down in there if you have to get all that oil out of there. And make sure that those are nice and clean. So we got all the holes blown out. There are, what, I think 6 around each cylinder. Went all the way down them and then came all the way back. Made sure they were all cleaned out real good. I actually did, this thing sat for a little bit, so it got, you know, some gumminess, and they get coolant and oil in there when you pull the head off. So I actually shot brake clean down in each one and actually cleaned them out. If you have one come out hard when you take them out, you know, you should definitely run a tap down them and make sure that they're, you know, not screwed up. If you have one that comes out real hard, which I have had before, you know, you can run a tap down them and clean them out. Now what I'd like to do next, I use this stuff. This is really good stuff. This is BG Products. It's a pre-lube. And what I like to do with it is take and wipe some down in here in the cylinder walls, on the cylinders you can get to. Just because we got a bunch of junk down in there, and so I had to clean it out, and I wiped the cylinder walls down with a rag, and so there's no oil on them. So you want to make sure you get some oil put back down in there so that those rings have something nice to ride on. And then we'll get our head gasket set on here. Before we do that, we want to make sure we get a really good and clean around these guide pins here. There's one here, and then there's one in the back right here. And then I even like to take and put just a little bit of grease on there to help the head slide down over it real easy. So we'll get those things done. We'll get the head gasket set on here, and then I'll show you how to rig up the cylinder head on the engine hoist to get it in here. We got the head gasket set on here, and something you guys want to pay attention to when you guys get this on here is to make sure that, obviously I always like to just line it up with the old head gasket and make sure that all the holes line up and that everything's the way it's supposed to be. You don't have it flipped around. I mean, it's pretty hard not to put it on correctly, but I've seen it done. So I'm just letting you guys know to make sure you pay really good attention to the way this head gasket's put on here. Make sure you got it on there nice and straight, and obviously in the right orientation. Another thing, if you are building an engine, let's say, or something, if you do have to get the deck of the block decked at the machine shop, they should give you a spec as to what they took off, and you may have to get a thicker head gasket. So keep that in mind if you guys are doing any future overhauls or something, to make sure you have the right thickness head gasket. So now we're back over here to our cylinder head. We're getting ready to put it back together and get it back in the truck. So the way I like to do it is to install these lift hooks right here. It's just 2 bolts right here with the hook there, and then this thermostat housing, we're gonna have to get it cleaned up. I left it together so you guys could see it. There's a gasket right here, and then there's, once you pull your thermostat out, let me get it here like that. once you pull your thermostat out, there's going to be another gasket in there. So I have my 2 new gaskets. This is the one for the thermostat, and this is the one for on the other side of the thermostat. Then obviously we got to make sure we put our thermostat in the correct way. The spring part of it always goes out. This part always goes in, so it'll go in just like that. And then we'll put our other gasket out here on the outside, and then our actual lifting device goes in between that and the head. So we'll get all that put together. We'll get in here and get this all cleaned up, get our new gasket in, get our new thermostat thrown in there, and get that bolted to the cylinder head. Alright, so we got the thermostat housing bolted on here. It's 3 10mm bolts, and we got our I'm kind of putting the head together before I get it in the truck, just what I can, so it's easier. There's 2, if you take it to the machine shop, it's got to be completely bare, so we had to take these coolant bungs out of here. Just want to make sure we clean the threads up and put new thread tape on them. Both of these ones are 7/8 sockets. Just tighten them down until they're nice and tight. This is a 7mm bolt right here on this clamp. And then we also have another one here in the back. This is an 1/16". This is your coolant temp sensor. So we want to make sure we get all those in there. And then I also have this tool. This is a good time to do this when it's off. It's a Blue Point, part number MB6BTA. And what it is, guys, is it's basically like a wire brush, kind of like you'd clean up your battery cables with, but it's actually for the injector holes. The injector holes, as you can see on the injectors, they get kind of rusty after they've been in there for a while. So this tool basically just twists down in there like this, cleans the hole out, and then as you can see, it goes all the way through to the bottom side and cleans that hole out really nice, and allows the injector to go in easy, easier than if you didn't have that. But what it also does, and I don't know if you guys can see this or not, but it actually cleans out the bottom of the hole there where this copper crush washer on the end of the injector actually seats against, and you want to make sure that that is really nice and clean so that it makes a good seal. And then obviously this is what I'm waiting for right now, are these copper crush washers, and they're pretty expensive. They're like $10 a piece, I think, but you definitely want to make sure you replace them. They're kind of a one-time use deal, and that's what actually seals off the injector. Basically, we got the head pretty much ready to go in the truck. We're going to leave the injectors out of it, so it's easier to crank over when we're trying to get everything adjusted. We got our 2 15mm bolts here on the back for this bracket. Like I said, our 310s up front. So we got both of our hooks. We're going to run a chain across here. We're going to bring our engine hoist over. We're going to hook the engine hoist to it, and then we will get ready to get it in the truck. So we got it rigged up here on the engine stand, guys. You can see the bottom of our head here is all machined and looking nice. Everything's good there. I want to go back in here and double check our head gasket, make sure nothing's moved, nothing's weird. Double check all of our holes. Obviously make sure nothing's down in the cylinders, and we'll start getting ready to get this thing in there. So we got it on there. I just wanted to show you guys a little trick I use to help aid me because I'm by myself. Something you can do is get the head pretty much close to where it's going to land, and then you can start throwing some studs in it. These are the old ones, but you can see here I threw a couple exhaust side studs in. and then some up top, and then you can basically just set it down and the bolts will kind of guide it. So leave it up, you know, half inch or so from the actual head gasket, and then you can put some bolts in there to kind of help guide you down, because it's really kind of hard to see at all angles. So put some bolts in there to help set the head back down, and then once you got it back down, we can unhook all of our stuff here off the engine hoist and get this stuff out of our way and move on to the next thing. Okay guys, so we got this head on here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start installing the head bolts. Now on this there's 3 different lengths of head bolts. We have the small ones that go in here by the exhaust housing, and then we have 2 sets of bolts that go right here, and then we have the long bolts go right on here where the rocker pedestal sits. So here on the bench I'll show you what I'm talking about. So these are the long bolts here. They go in our rocker pedestals. They go through the pedestal, through the head, and into the block. And then these ones here are the ones that go in the middle, and these go out by the exhaust housing. So we're just going to get all of our bolts in there and started. We're going to start with these, and we're going to wait for the long ones until we install our rocker pedestals and push rods. Okay guys, so we got all of our head bolts started here. We got the small ones, and then we got the 2 medium ones here and here, all the way in, just getting them started. And then what I did was put some assembly lube on all the tops of all the valves. And then the next thing we're going to need to do is put our push rods in. Here what we're going to do is just grab a push rod. Well, this is number 1 up here. We're going to take and just dip them in the assembly lube. Get a little bit of assembly lube on the bottom of them, just like that. And take them up. Drop it down in here. Just like that. We're going to put all of them in. Make sure they're all the way down in there. And we're going to put all of the push rods in. Then we're going to lubricate the top of them. And then we can set our rocker arms down on top of there so we can get those studs put in them. So lubricate the push rods, put them in there, make sure they're fully seated. Put lube on the top of them. Then we're going to set our rocker arms on there. Start all the bolts. Just get them started, and then we'll come back and we'll start the torque procedure. Another thing here too guys, is we're going to loosen up all of our studs here for the push rods. We're going to loosen those up so that we can fit the rocker arms on there, and they don't try to start compressing the valves. We just want to loosen them up so they go on there real easy and we can get these torqued well. Okay guys, so we got our rocker arms on here and the bolts just started. They're still loose. But what we're going to want to do now, like I said, is come through and break all these nuts loose on these adjusters and run the adjuster all the way out, loosen it all the way up, so that you want to make sure that this sits flat on here, and there actually is a little like a step to this, and it actually sits down in there. So I'm going to loosen all these up so that, see, this one's kind of hanging up like that, so that they sit flat on here. We can get a good torque out of these. So 14 millimeter, break all these loose, and then a flathead screwdriver to run these out, and then we'll get all them ran out of there, and we'll get started on getting this torqued. Okay, so we got all of our rocker arms loose, guys. We backed all of our adjusters off. We got all of our bolts. I just ran them down till they touched basically everywhere, and then we're gonna pull up our torque sequence, which you can get off of Mitchell. I'll actually throw it in the end of this video. Then the first step here is we're going to torque all the bolts to 66 foot-pounds right here. Torque all the bolts to 66 foot-pounds, and we're going to do it in this sequence right here. Kind of line it up, put it down here where you can see it, line it up with the way the engine's oriented. And we'll go through and we'll get all these things torqued down. And the way I do it is usually I go through and torque it. I get a paint marker out. And so my first stage, I'll just put like 1 line. And then when I come back in my second step, I'll put like 2 lines, and then the third one. So I can keep an eye, remember where I'm at when I'm torquing. Because sometimes, with 26 head bolts, it gets kind of confusing. So I always like to mark it where I torque them so I know where I'm at. And just keep an eye on your orientation of where you're going from. and we want to make sure we do it in the sequence so that the head gets torqued down flat and everything's nice and straight. So we'll go through here and we'll torque these to 66 foot-pounds, and then the next step we'll move on to after. Alright guys, so now we are done with the second stage. Once again, first stage, we're going to torque all bolts in sequence to 66 foot-pounds, including the short ones. And then in our second stage, we're going to come back and torque the long bolts to 89 foot-pounds. But we're still going to do it in sequence with our sequence chart here. We're just going to skip the short ones. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, and then we would go 4, but we're going to skip that, so we just keep working your way around. But we're going to come back and torque all the long ones to 89 foot-pounds. And when I did that, I put a mark in it, so I have a dot on my exhaust ones, and I have a line on these to show that I've torqued them to the 89, and then we'll come back and we'll put a cross in them when we're all done. So now we'll come back, take everything another additional 90 degrees in the sequence, and we'll be good to go. So first things first, to set our valves, guys, I want to show you this down here. This is kind of an important piece of this. Right down here, let me get my light in the right spot here, is a timing pin. It's right on the driver's side, right above the vacuum pump here. It's this pin right here. It goes in and out, and you can push it in and push it out. This one, see how it moves right in here? So there is like a detent on the cam gear as you rotate it over, that this will fall into, and so you just kind of want to push it in while you're rotating the engine over, and then it'll just kind of click in, and then you know you're on top dead center. So this is how you find top dead center. Unfortunately on this one, whoever worked on this before broke the end of the pin off. Pull it out so you can see it. That's what it looks like, and there should be like a little stud on the end of this that goes into that cam gear, and it unfortunately is broke off, so this is no help to us, but it's not a big deal. There's many ways to find top dead center. You can stick a dial indicator down in here in the delivery valve. The easiest way I've found to do it, kind of backyard Bob way, is I just stuck a pick down in here in the injector hole right here, crank the engine over till it came all the way up to top dead center. And then what you want to do is make sure that these valves on cylinder 1 are loose. What this means, the rocker arms per se, and what this means, when both of these arms are loose, both valves are closed and we're on compression. So we want to make sure both valves are completely closed and we're on TDC of cylinder 1. Now we're going to go through, and when we get to that point, we can adjust the valves corresponding to that. So with cylinder 1 on top dead center of compression, they're going to go through two different steps here. We're going to adjust the intake and exhaust valves at the same time. There's a certain ones you want to adjust. So on step 1 with cylinder 1 at TDC, we're going to adjust the exhaust valves on cylinders 1, 3, and 5. And then we're going to go through and adjust the intake valves on cylinders 1, 2, and 4. Okay, and so when you're looking at this, this is going to be your intake valve right here, which is up front, and this is going to be the exhaust valve. So we're going to do 10 thousandths on the intake valve and 20 thousandths on the exhaust valve. So here we are, guys, on number one. We're doing both on number one. So right now we're on the intake, and what we're gonna do is take and put our feeler gauge in there, put it all the way in till it's nice and centered on there. I already got this one adjusted, but put it in there until we're nice and centered. And then what we're gonna do is take and put our number one, put our 14mm wrench on there, and we're gonna tighten this down just until it hits. You don't want to crank it. We're just gonna, you'll feel it when you start to tighten it up, and it'll just hit a spot where it kind of bottoms out. And then we're just gonna want to tighten up this 14mm wrench. And then what you should feel when you pull it out is a slight drag, like that. You can kind of feel a slight drag on it, and that's what we're looking for, guys. So what we're gonna want to do here, we're gonna take, and this is our exhaust, so we're gonna want to go to 20 thousandths on our feeler gauge, which is right here. We stick our feeler gauge in. Doesn't quite want to fit in there, so we've taken, loosen it up a little bit, get it in there, run it down till it touches, and taking a 14mm wrench in there, and you kind of want to hold the screwdriver against the wrench as you're tightening it up. And like I said, when you pull it out, it should be kind of a nice slight drag when you put it in there. It should go in like that, and a nice slight drag when you pull it out like that. So we're going to go through and we're going to do all the valves I talked about. Like I said, once again, we're doing exhaust valves 1, 3, and 5, and intake valves 1, 2, and 4, and then we'll go on to the next step after that. So with everything adjusted, we're going to come back and we're going to tighten our rocker lever adjusting screw to 18 foot-pounds on all the ones we just did. And then we're going to come down here. This is the best way I found to do it, and I made a mark. I don't know if you can really see it or not, but make a mark somewhere down here on the crank pulley where you can see, see, I made that little yellow mark right there on that bolt. And we're going to rotate this engine 360 degrees, and then we're going to adjust the other set of valves. So rotate it 360 degrees, and then we're going to come back and we are going to do exhaust valves 2, 4, and 6 at 20 thousandths, and intake valves 3, 5, and 6 at 10 thousandths. So at this point, guys, after our first step on these valves, normally what you're going to want to do before you rotate the engine is make sure you double check that timing pin down there, that you got that timing pin pulled out. Otherwise you'll break it off like this one, and that's probably what happened here. So make sure in between step 1 and step 2, before you rotate this engine, that you pull that timing pin back out, and then you're just going to rotate it back around until you get till it pushes back in. Then you know you're back on top dead center again. For our instance, since ours is broke, we're just going to mark the crank, and then we're going to rotate it back around. Alright, now that we're done with that, guys, we got all of our rocker arm adjusting nuts torqued to 18 foot-pounds. We're pretty much done as far as valve covers go, or as far as the valve train goes. Everything's pre-lubed. What we're going to do is probably put some squirts of oil on these rockers just to lubricate them. Take some 15W40 and just put some oil on these to help it with startup until it builds oil pressure. Like I said, we have our injectors out of it, so it's easier to rotate over. So we'll get our valve covers put on, and then we will get our injectors, start getting ready to put our injectors in. Now we're moving on to getting the valve covers ready, guys. There's 2 things we got to do here. Obviously put the valve cover gaskets on. I went through and cleaned the inside of every one of the valve covers out. Like I said, it was kind of just dirty from the typical diesel oil stuff, so we're gonna get those. We got all those cleaned up, and then there also comes with these O-rings for the bolts themselves, so we're gonna want to get those on as well. But before we actually put the valve covers on, something I always like to do, just to be safe, is rotate this engine over 720 degrees, which is basically 2 revolutions, just to take it all the way through its cycle, just to make sure that none of the valves are hitting or anything like that. Like I said, if you follow it through the procedure I took you through, you should be fine, but just for a peace of mind, it's always nice to rotate the engine over twice just to make sure everything's cherry. And like I said, with the injectors out, this thing should rotate over with no problems whatsoever. If you do run into a problem where you have a problem where the engine won't turn over, definitely don't try to horse it. This thing should go, like, literally I had a 3/8 ratchet on there just doing one of these numbers. So the thing should rotate over super easy. If it doesn't, you have a problem, stop, don't rotate it, don't try to keep rotating it, because you'll end up bending something, bend a push rod or something like that. So figure out what's going on with it, take and loosen these back up, figure it out, and then you know, readjust things and then try it again. So with our engine rotated 720 degrees and our valve covers ready to go, we'll get those put on, get the top end of the engine sealed up, and we'll move on. So valve covers are on. I just started them. Normally they have like a cover that goes over top of this, so these studs, you gotta line the studs up with where they go in the cover, but this one, the cover's gone. So we're just gonna go through and we're gonna torque these to 18 foot-pounds. Just run them down nice and, like I said, get them close with your impact so you're not ratcheting for 3 days. Get them close and then just come through and get them all nice and tight. Alright, so those are all torqued there. Everything's good to go there. So valve covers are done. Now we're going to move on to getting our injectors ready to go. You can see they kind of got a bit of rust there where the retaining nut goes. I want to make sure not to get any junk in the return line. So just kind of get it in here and just... Ideally, you should have these injectors capped. I don't have any caps though, so I'm just paying attention to making sure that, you know, I'm not getting any junk in there. So we want to clean these up real good so that they go back in there nicely. We'll also get a wire brush down inside our cups here and the retaining nut. We'll clean the inside of that out. Like I said before, we already got our bores cleaned out where it goes down into. So if you haven't done that at this point, we want to use this brush right here and clean the bores out in the head. And then we're also going to want to go through and install our new sealing washers. And then we'll get ready to start putting the injectors in the head. Okay guys, and we're going to want to do next here on these injectors is where we cleaned it up. Right in here, this is where that nut's going to go. So you want to take and put some anti-seize on there just to keep the nut from seizing to it, and it comes out a heck of a lot easier next time. So right there like that, and then what we're going to want to look for is there's a notch in the cylinder head. And we're going to want to put this detent ball in that notch, and it helps line up the injector when you put it down in there, and then you just push down in there and it'll just snap in. Alright guys, so let me try to show this to you here. This little detent, see if you can see it, is right there. See that little indent in the head? So that's basically where you're going to take and line this up with right here, that little detent right there. And just kind of hold up on the copper crush washer. I just kind of keep it up like that to where you can get it in there, and you'll feel it'll kind of
sit like this, and then once you get it in that detent, it'll kind of drop down in there, and then you know you're in there square. So that's what you're looking for. And then basically you just take your hold down and put that on there with the new O-ring, and then you're good to go. Alright guys, so here we're going to tighten this up. It's a 24 millimeter. We're just going to run through and snug all these up. Now we're going to go through and we're going to tighten all these retaining nuts down to 44 inch-pounds, or 44 foot-pounds, I'm sorry, with our 24 millimeter socket. So we're getting ready. We've got the manifold chucked up in the vise here, guys. What we're going to want to do is just take a real soft, nothing that's going to take a bunch of metal away, just something that's going to take a, you know, the little bit of soot and carbon and stuff that's on there. Just something to take that off. Just just like that, guys. That's what we're looking for. We want to, ideally, we want to try to keep this plane right here as flat as possible. Ideally, the perfect scenario would be to plane it on like a, you know, a planer or something like that, but we don't have that here. So just clean them up good and do the same thing on the cylinder head, and then we'll get ready to throw this manifold on there. So we're ready to install the manifold. What I did was took all my bolts over to the wire wheel and cleaned them up. Double check and make sure that they go in the head real nice. Run a tap down if you have to clean them up. These ones were all pretty good. Make sure we get our new exhaust manifold gaskets, and then we'll bring our manifold over and start throwing some bolts in it, and we'll tighten it down to 32 foot-pounds. There is a sequence, and I will show you how to do that as well. So what I like to do on this is just take and start the bolts with your gaskets on there. These ones got a little bent up in the packaging, but it'll be all right. But just kind of get them started in there so that then when you go to set the manifold in, the gaskets are already there, and basically it kind of lines itself all up. It's a lot easier than trying to sneak the gasket in there and get it started. So get all 6 of them lined up on there with the bolts in it. Just start them and then make a couple of them longer where you want to start first, and then it'll go in pretty easy. Alright, so we got our manifold on here now, guys. We got all of our bolts started. So we're just going to go through and we're going to start in the middle. Just kind of work our way out. Just run them down. You don't have to kill them. Just get them run down. Kind of try to alternate every couple. Alright, now we're going to come back through and go 32 foot-pounds with our 13 millimeter socket. And here's the procedure. We're basically starting in the middle and working up, down as we work out. So start in the middle and just kind of go like this as you're working your way out to try to bring the manifold in easily in square. Okay, once we got our first pass done, guys, we're going to want to go back and hit them again. The manifold always gets a little warped from the heat and stuff. So you go through and torque it, and this was torqued to 32 foot-pounds, and you can see, you know, I hope to turn. You can see here we're not there, so we got to go back and kind of hit them again. Just double check them all and make sure that they're all kind of do it, and sometimes you got to do it a couple times just to make sure you get them all torqued down to 32 evenly. Okay guys, now we're getting ready to install a turbo. We got our new gasket on here. We got both of our flanges cleaned up. New gasket going here on the drain line, and then we got 4 nuts to secure it to the manifold. So it's really nice if you have a helper to help you throw it in there. So once you guys get it on there and get the bolts started, it's a 15mm. It's just kind of a tedious process. You just kind of gotta get in here and snug them as you can. Try to bring them down evenly, just like the manifold. So get the ones up, kind of alternate where you're tightening at, just to get it brought in evenly, so it crushes the gasket good. Like I said, it's kind of the slow boat to China, but there's really no way to get a good torque on these, like a torque number. So just get them nice and snug. And then we'll get our oil feed line in here, right here, and then our oil drain line on the bottom, and get our intercooler pipe down here hooked in with the new O-ring, 11mm on that clamp. And then same thing back here on the exhaust. We'll get our clamp back here on the exhaust back here. That's also an 11mm, and then we'll be pretty much done with the manifold. We got our put our pyro back in, which is right here. That goes down in there, tightens in right there. And other than that, we're pretty much good with the turbos. We're gonna move on to now putting the return line for the injectors back on. You should get new copper crush washers to go with them on these ones as well. They're like little, they kind of look like a hook like that, and they slide down over the bolt. So new ones of those, and we'll get them put in and torqued to spec all the way down, and then it goes around back here into our fuel bowl right here, and then the bolt for the intake holds that bracket right there. So get all of these put on, and then get ready to put the intake and the injection lines on it. So now all that's on there. These are 10mm here on these return line banjo fittings. We have 6 of them obviously, and then there is a hold down bolt right here for that bracket on the intake, so we'll wait to tighten that up till we get them all in there. And then this fitting right here on the top of that, new seal or new gasket or sealing washers there as well, and that is a 12mm. So now what we'll do is we'll take and we'll lay our injection lines in here, get them hooked up to our little brackets here, and just get them tightened, just finger tighten them to start with, and then we'll come back and we'll torque them. So we got our lines on here. We have them clamped down. All of the nuts are started. We just want to make sure we got them on there and threaded real good. All right, now we got the intake on. We got all those lines torqued. Everything's good to go there. We got our dipstick here. Want to make sure we get that in there where it needs to go. It's going to bolt into the intake right here. Just want to make sure we got that in there nice before we bolt this down. Now these on the intake, guys, are all 10mm, and they torque to 18 foot-pounds. We're just gonna run them down here. Now we're gonna go through and torque all of those to 18 foot-pounds. All right, now everything's torqued there. We're gonna move to the back here. We're gonna lay our wiring harness in here. We're gonna plug our app sensor in. Put our harness back where it's supposed to be on that little clip. Get that all sitting nice. We'll zip tie these vacuum lines up and get that routed a little better there. And then we have our two grid heater lines that we have to run as well. Up here we got to hook our two grid heater wires up. Little 10mm nuts. Tighten them down, we'll be good to go. Okay guys, so we got our intake on. Over here, the actual torque specification, it's not as much as you think. It's 72 inch-pounds on these clamps. Same thing over on the exhaust and the compressor side of the turbo. So I started running some of this wiring. I actually ran into a problem where I had this harness routed incorrectly, and I had to take the thermostat housing back off because I had it underneath. So make sure you have this wiring harness up above the thermostat housing, and then you got a 15mm here on this bracket and a 15mm down here on this bracket, and then you also have a wire coming from the alternator, this one right here, that goes right down underneath here. See if I can get some light on it for you. Goes right there where that bolt's at. So right there is where that alternator wire goes. And then we'll just, like I said, get it all nice and clean. I kind of have OCD when it comes to this stuff, making sure everything's nice and neat. We will get our alternator bracket put back on here. And then I got all of the injection lines just snug with a wrench. These are 19mm. I got them all snug with a wrench. We're gonna have to crack them loose to bleed the system anyway, so I didn't really worry about it too much. We got our 10mm tight on our grid heater there. Next thing I think we're gonna do is get our thermostat or our coolant lines here for the heater core. We're gonna get them ran. There's bolts that go into the manifold right here to hold it down, and then we have one hose right down here that it'll go into. So we can get that put on there, and then we will get the radiator hose on and start getting ready to bleed this thing. So for the bleeding procedure, guys, I have it's a vacuum bleeder. Basically, it pulls all the air out of it. I'm sure probably a lot of you guys don't have something like this, so what you can do is just put coolant in it and then just leave the radiator cap off. You know, once the thermostat opens, it'll gurgle out of there. But this thing, pretty slick tool. If you guys do a lot of stuff with cooling systems, it's definitely a really good investment. Basically what you do is it's got a gauge on it, and you just suck it down like this. Pulls a vacuum on the hose, collapses the hoses, pulls all the air out of the system. But then it also duals as a tester too, so you can shut the valve off and see if it holds vacuum, which obviously it is, so that's good. So then you can it's kind of a check to see if you know, everything's tight and right. And then basically all we're gonna do is sit here and put this end in our coolant and turn that valve, and it uses a vacuum to draw the coolant in. Pretty slick tool, man. If you guys are interested in this, just let me know. I can send you the information about it. It's a really nice tool. And so we got the cooling system bled. We're gonna just let it sit for a minute and make sure everything holds pressure. I got the alternator on. Just, like I said, at this point, guys, it's worth just giving everything a good once over, making sure everything's tight, making sure you got everything plugged in, make sure you got the coolant temp sensor down there in the back of the cylinder head. It's kind of hard to get to. Make sure you don't forget about plugging that in. Other than that, we got pretty much all of our wiring ran and zip tied where we need it to be. We're pretty much ready to put some oil in this thing and fire it up. So we'll let our cooling system sit for a bit. We'll fill it up and we'll get ready to start this thing. Alright, so now we got it drawn down into a vacuum, so now we're just going to turn our lever. And you'll see it start to draw it in and fill the system. Pretty easy. Does it all on its own. We're reusing this coolant because it's pretty much brand new. We just did a coolant flush in it, so let it do its thing and let it get topped off, and once it's out, we'll put some oil in it and fire this thing up. Alright guys, so we got our coolant is full. We got the oil in it. For those of you that don't know, it takes 11 quarts of 15W40. So we got our oil in it, like I said, and we're gonna go through now and crack all of our injection lines loose on this side. No more than one turn, really. You just gotta crack them loose, that's about it. And then we're gonna stuff some rags down in here to try to catch some of the fuel, just so it doesn't get all over everything. And then, like I said, we're gonna go in and crank it over, purge some of that air out of there. We'll come out, we'll torque these to 22 foot-pounds, and we'll crank this sucker up. So I wasn't getting any, I cranked it like 3 or 4 times, and I wasn't getting any fuel out of the lines over there. So I came back to the fuel filter housing here, and this 10mm bolt right here on this fuel line by the fuel bowl is the bleed screw for the fuel bowl. And I probably should have started there, but what you have to do is take that bolt loose, and then down here, it's going to be hard for me to get a video of it here. Down here is a pencil pump that you need to push like this. Just push this pump. Where is it here? It's right behind here.
There?
If I can find it. Right here. You guys see this right here? So we're just gonna pump that, just like that, while you got that bleed screw open, and that will push the air out of that bleed screw, and you want it to be a nice steady stream coming out of that bleed screw. And once you get a nice steady stream out of there, you know that you got all the air out of the system there. So now we'll try to go around and crank that, crank it with the lines broke loose on the pump. Since we had air back there, we'll break these lines loose on the pump, get the air out of here, and then we'll go back and get the air out of the lines over there. We kind of got to work ourselves from the fuel bowl through the pump over to the injectors. So let's try that. Okay guys, so you can see we're starting to get some fuel now, which is a good thing. We're still getting air. Poor starter's hating its life, but we're getting somewhere. It can be a bit of a pain here to get these things going, guys, on this bleeding procedure here. It can be kind of frustrating at times. But we just got to keep going through it, making sure that we don't absolutely roach the starter. He's a little toasty, so we'll probably let it sit for a minute. Put the fan on it. But you can see here we're starting to bubble up and get some air out, which is a good sign. We'll just keep working it, guys, until we get all that air out of there, and then we'll close these off. Once these are good, we'll close these ones off, and we'll go over on the other side until we get all the air out over there. Then we'll close them all and we'll fire her up. Alright guys, moment of truth here. We're gonna try to start this thing. I think I got enough of the air bled out, she might start, so let's give it a try. Nice and quiet. We got them valve adjusted nice. Sounds really good. At this point, guys, we're going to want to look for leaks. Check to make sure nothing's leaking. Pull our rags out of here. Inspect to make sure nothing's leaking. That's the big thing here. Alright guys, so here we are taking her for a test run. Thing's running beautiful. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope this video helped, man. It was a fun project and came together really well. Thanks for watching.